In the quiet suburb of a bustling city, a couple once stood as the epitome of love and commitment. They had built a life together from scratch, shared dreams, endless promises, and a bond they believed would last forever. But sometimes, life takes unexpected turns, and not all hearts remain loyal to the path they vowed to follow. One fateful evening, everything changed. Drawn by the allure of novelty and youth, he made a decision that shattered his spouse's world. He walked away from their home, their memories, and the love they had nurtured, all for someone new. To him, it felt like a second chance at passion, an escape from routine, but was it? As time went by, he seemed to have it all: laughter, excitement, and a fresh start. Yet, deep down, the choices he made began to weigh on him in ways he never anticipated. Meanwhile, the woman he left behind, broken yet resilient, embarked on a journey of her own, a journey she never expected to take, but one that would redefine her life. Fast forward a decade, and destiny has a way of catching up. One unexpected encounter, one twist of fate, and everything he thought he had left behind comes rushing back with a force he cannot ignore. The truth he faces will test everything he believes about love, loyalty, and the price of betrayal. What happens when the past refuses to stay buried? When the choices you make come full circle? Stay tuned to discover the heart-wrenching, life-changing lesson that destiny delivered. This is a story of heartbreak, redemption, and the power of time to heal or destroy. As the years passed, he thought he had moved on, convinced that his new life was everything he had ever dreamed of. His relationship with his young lover was a whirlwind of excitement. There were no expectations, no baggage, just an exhilarating sense of freedom that made him feel invincible. The worries and doubts he had when he left his spouse had all but disappeared, replaced by a renewed sense of confidence. He worked hard to build the life he had envisioned, never once looking back at the life he abandoned. But there were moments, late at night, when the noise of the world slowed down. He would sit in silence, feeling an unsettling emptiness. His lover, full of life and energy, would often be asleep beside him, oblivious to the stirring thoughts in his mind. The emptiness wasn't just in his home or the void in his heart, it was something deeper. A gnawing feeling that no amount of success or affection could fill. His spouse, the one he left behind all those years ago, had also gone on with her life. At first, she was devastated. She had tried everything to make the marriage work, but after he left, she was forced to pick up the pieces of her life alone. She threw herself into work, into friendships, and into personal growth, but she could never truly escape the pain. There were nights when the loneliness felt suffocating, when the memories of happier times would overwhelm her. Yet, despite the pain, she found strength she didn't know she had. Slowly but surely, she built a new life. She never expected to love again, not after what he had done to her, but life had a funny way of surprising people. She met someone who saw her, really saw her, for the woman she had become. He was kind, patient, and supportive in ways she never experienced before. It was a slow burn, but over time, she allowed herself to fall in love again. There was a quiet joy in their connection, something that felt like healing, not rushing to fill a void, but truly learning to love again in the healthiest way possible. Yet even with her new love, she couldn't erase the past entirely. Some nights, she'd lie awake in bed, wondering if he ever regretted what he did. if he ever thought about her. And deep down, she knew he hadn't just left her for someone younger, he had left her for the version of life that promised everything she couldn't give him anymore. That thought haunted her. She had always been devoted to him, but he wanted more. He wanted excitement. He wanted to feel alive in ways he didn't with her. Years went by, and their separate lives took different paths. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. The first time they saw each other again, it was by accident. He was walking through the park, just as he had done so many times in his youth, when he saw a familiar face. It wasn't the face of the woman he had left behind, but it was hers nonetheless. She looked different now, more composed, more confident. He didn't recognize her at first, but there was something about her that tugged at his memory. Then, the unmistakable feeling of guilt hit him. He had left her once, and now here she was, living a life that seemed so far removed from the world he had chosen. It wasn't until she looked up and met his gaze that he realized who she was. Time had changed her, but it had also changed him. There was an awkward silence between them. He had no idea what to say, or if he even deserved to say anything at all. She stood there, staring at him, as if weighing whether to acknowledge the past or to walk away and never look back. She had moved on. She had learned to live without him, but seeing him, now standing in front of her, clearly different but still carrying the same weight of regret, stirred something deep inside her. It wasn't just the man who had betrayed her that she saw. It was also the man who had once been her best friend. The man who had once promised her forever. She wondered, not for the first time, how he had managed to look at her and just walk away. She had asked herself this question countless times, but now, seeing him face to face, the answers seemed more elusive than ever. He was the one who had chosen the path of abandonment. He was the one who had turned his back on their love. He was the one who had left her in the dust. And yet, here he was, with an expression that seemed to carry years of regret and confusion. She didn't know whether to feel pity for him or anger. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. They were two people who had once been everything to each other, now standing on opposite sides of a chasm that neither could cross. He wanted to speak, to explain, but what could he possibly say? There was nothing that would take away the years of pain he had caused. Nothing that could undo the damage he had done. But she wasn't sure if she wanted to hear his excuses. She had spent so much of her life wondering why he had left, but now that she saw him, it didn't seem to matter. The question she had asked herself for so long seemed irrelevant. Now, what mattered was that she had moved on. She had built a life without him, and though it hadn't been easy, it was hers. She had come to realize that the life she had created was better than the one he had left behind. And yet, despite all the anger and betrayal, there was a part of her that still longed for closure. She wanted to know if he had ever truly regretted leaving her. She wanted to know if he had ever felt the same way about her as she had about him. But she wasn't sure if that closure was something she could find with him. He could feel the tension in the air. His heart raced, and for the first time in years, he questioned everything. Did he truly regret his decision? Did he make a mistake? He had convinced himself that leaving her was the right choice, that he was finding something better. But as the years passed, the questions started to creep in. Was the excitement of his new life worth the price he had paid? His lover, the one who had filled the empty space he thought he had grown distant over the years. What was once thrilling had become routine. He began to notice things about her that bothered him, things he once found charming were now just irritants. In truth, he was searching for something he couldn't even name. He couldn't explain the void he felt, but it was there, like a shadow that followed him no matter how far he ran. And now, standing before the woman he had left behind, he realized that the shadow was not just his past, it was his future. The decision he made a decade ago wasn't just a turning point. It had been a fork in the road, and he had chosen the wrong path. As they stood there in silence, each caught in their own web of regret, it became clear that their story was far from over. Their paths had crossed once again, but this time there would be no easy answers. The questions would linger, and the weight of the past would follow them both, like an unrelenting storm that refused to pass. The tension between them was palpable, and neither of them knew what would happen next. Would they confront the past? Or would they simply walk away once again, leaving the questions unanswered? Only time would tell. But for now, they were trapped in a moment where everything was uncertain. Would fate give them the chance to reconcile? Or would it be another lesson in lost time? The air between them grew heavier, the weight of unsaid words settling in the space where their past once stood. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but nothing came. It was a strange thing, this feeling of paralysis, standing face to face with the one person who had meant everything to him, yet finding himself unable to speak. It wasn't just the guilt that rendered him silent. It was the realization that whatever words he had now were years too late. How could he ever explain why he had walked away? Or worse, why he thought leaving her would bring him happiness? She, too, felt the pull of the past in a way she hadn't expected. Time had softened her, given her distance, but seeing him again brought it all rushing back, the good, the bad, and the raw emotions she had buried. But she had come so far since that time. She had lived a life, a good life, one filled with love, challenges, growth, and joy. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. She didn't need closure to validate the life she had created. And yet, there was something in her that was drawn to him, even now. Not the man he had been when they were married, but the man he had become. She had spent so many years asking herself the same questions. Why did he leave? Did he ever love me? Was I not enough? But now, in front of him, she realized those questions no longer mattered. The life she had built had filled the void. She had learned the hard way that she could be whole without him. His eyes searched hers, full of vulnerability, full of regret. The man standing before her was no longer the confident figure who had walked out of her life without a second thought. Time had weathered him, but it had also opened his eyes. And now he was left with nothing but the desire to make amends, to fix something that he knew could never truly be fixed. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words coming out in a strained breath, as if they carried all the weight of his years of regret. It was such a simple apology, but it felt like it contained everything he had been too afraid to admit in the years he had spent running from his choices. She didn't respond immediately, choosing instead to absorb his words. She had heard apologies before, but this one felt different. This wasn't an apology for something small, something that could be fixed with time. This was an apology for years of heartbreak, years of loss, and years of a life built on lies. She could tell it was sincere, and for a fleeting moment she wondered if he had truly found the remorse he had been missing all those years. But as the moment stretched on, She remembered something important, something she had learned through her own journey. "It's too late for that," she said, her voice steady but firm. "You can't undo what you did. You can't change the past." His heart sank, but she wasn't finished. "But that doesn't mean we can't move forward. That doesn't mean I can't forgive you. It just means I'm not longer waiting for you to fix what you broke." Her words hung in the air, a declaration of strength and closure. He had thought that facing her after all these years would be a chance for redemption, for some kind of peace. But what she had given him was something entirely different, something more valuable. She had given him the truth that he had spent so many years running from, the truth that he could never go back. He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. There was nothing he could say in response to that, nothing that could change the way things had unfolded. All he could do now was accept it. "Have you been happy?" he asked. The question a quiet one, born more from curiosity than any expectation of an answer. It wasn't the kind of question one asks lightly, especially after what had happened between them. But there was something in his voice, a genuine longing to know how she had turned out in the end. Her lips curved into a small smile, a sad, knowing smile. "I have," she said simply. "More than I ever thought I would, even after everything." He didn't know why, but hearing those words, hearing that she had found happiness without him, made something inside him shift. It was painful, yes, but it also felt like a weight being lifted. The idea that she had lived a life full of joy, not defined by the shadow of his absence, made him feel a strange sense of peace. It wasn't the peace he had imagined for himself all those years ago, but it was peace nonetheless. He could see it in her eyes. This wasn't about him anymore. This was about her. She had made her peace with the past, and she had learned to forgive herself, if not him, for the mistakes that had been made. And she had found love again. Real love. Not the kind that was built on false promises, but the kind that had stood the test of time. He couldn't help but feel a pang of envy, a longing for the kind of peace she had. As they stood there, both of them in silence, the past and the present seemed to collide in a way neither of them could have predicted. Neither of them was the person they had once been. He wasn't the man who had left her all those years ago, and she wasn't the woman who had been left behind. They were both different now, shaped by their choices, their experiences, and the time they had spent apart. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was the lesson they both needed to learn. It wasn't about fixing the past, it was about learning to live with it, to accept the parts of themselves that they couldn't change. After what felt like an eternity, she spoke again, her voice softer now. "You'll find your way," she said, her words almost like a quiet prayer. "You just have to stop running." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time in a long while he realized that she was right. He had been running his entire life from responsibility, from his mistakes, from the truth. But it was time to stop. It was time to face the consequences of his actions, to accept that there was no way to undo the past, no way to make things right again. But he could try to be better. For himself, for the people he cared about, for the person he had been and the person he wanted to become. They stood there for a few more moments, neither knowing what to say or do next. It was an odd, quiet kind of peace that settled between them, one that neither could explain but both understood. There was no grand reconciliation, no dramatic outburst of emotion, just a quiet, unspoken understanding that Their lives had moved on in ways they could never have predicted. And that was... Okay. Finally, he spoke, his voice tinged with a sadness that had been there all along. I hope you're happy, he said simply. I really do. I am, she replied with a soft smile. And I hope you find your peace too. With that, they parted ways, their paths once again diverging. But this time, there was no bitterness, no anger, just a quiet understanding that the past was behind them, and the future, though uncertain, held new possibilities for both of them. And as he walked away, a strange sense of peace began to settle in his chest. He couldn't change the past, but perhaps, just perhaps, he could begin to shape the future. In the end, they had both learned the same lesson that life wasn't about perfect choices or flawless love. It was about growth, about learning from the mistakes, and about finding peace in the present, no matter how much the past still lingered. The past had shaped them, but it didn't define them. And for the first time in years, they both felt free.